All right, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Apu Karajagi and I'll be facilitating today's webinar, which is called Keeping Dementia in Mind, Preventing Falls by Creating Dementia-Friendly Homes. Um, so before we start, I just wanted to, oh, if the slide will move. I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters that I'm presenting today from Whadjuk Noongar Boodja. And I just want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, as well as the leaders emerging. Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I wanted you guys to use the chat box to acknowledge the country you are tuning in from as well. I know there's a few people that are tuning in interstate. So I'd love to know what land you're joining us from today as well. So before we start, I wanted to go over a bit of housekeeping. So everyone should be muted as well as the videos turned off, but just double check that your microphones are muted so that we can hear the presenters clearly. Also, if you have any questions or any comments, please just use the chat box throughout the presentation. We'll be taking questions as we get them. So just don't use the Q&A box, just use the chat box for today. And also, if you have more than one person in the room with you joining and seeing the webinar today, just let us know so that we know how many people are actually tuning in. And if you have any tech issues as well throughout the webinar, just let us know in the chat box and we'll try and help you out with that. And also today's webinar is recorded. So today we'll be going over and reviewing dementia and its effects on falls risk in older adults. We'll also look at ways to support and assist clients with dementia in their homes, as well as how to access relevant resources and appropriate services and health professionals as well. And just overall, we'll be looking at how to create supportive environments for people living with dementia. So a bit about us and who we are. Injury Matters is a not-for-profit organisation, and we are for safer people and places. Injury Matters aims to prevent and reduce the impact of injury within the WA community, and we do this through advocating and providing education for injury prevention, as well as providing support for people who have been impacted by injury. And today's webinar is through the Stay on Your Feet program, which is one of the programs that is supported by the Department of Health WA. The Stay on Your Feet program provides information, training and support to the older adult community members, as well as professionals who work with older adults on how to prevent falls in the community. And we do this through the Move, Improve, Remove campaigns. So I just want to touch on falls and what that looks like in the WA context. Falls and falls-related injuries continue to be a significant public health issue in WA. On average, one Western Australian dies from a falls-related injury every 25 hours, is admitted to hospital for a falls-related injury every 17 minutes, attends an emergency department as a result of a fall every 13 minutes. So as you can tell, falls is a big injury risk in WA, and you can read more about the statistics of it in our falls report 2022, which you can access via our website. And how does dementia make sense in all of this? People with dementia fall 2 to 3 times more often than cognitively healthy older adults and are 5 times more likely to be hospitalized due to a fall. And with the older adult population increasing in numbers as well, we need to make sure that homes are actually safer for people with dementia, and we can make sure that they live independently for a bit longer as well. So to talk more about this and the topic for today, I want to welcome our speakers, Nick Seaman and Liz Fogel, who will be our presenters for today. Nick leads the environments team within the Dementia Training Australia team, so a government-funded organisation delivering a national training program to the workforce supporting people with dementia. And Nick and Liz work together at the Constructive Dialogue Architects as well. So please welcome Nick and Liz, who will be who will be presenting together.
Thank you, Apu. You can hear me okay now?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Okay, so thank you so much. We're coming to you from Sydney. So we're on Gadigal, the land of the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation, and likewise we pay our respects to leaders past, present and emerging. So the image behind shows that we're focusing on people's family homes. So last time that we spoke with Injury Matters, it was two years ago. We were focusing on residential care environments. And now today we're going to focus much more on what happens in people's homes. To give you a little bit more of an introduction to who we are. So we're architects who, our firm focuses on a range of scales of project primarily in that space of aged care and supporting older people. We do this because we're quite passionate about the fact that this is one of those places where what we design and what we do really matters to the people who we're working with. As well as that role within an architecture firm, as you mentioned, I lead the environments team at Dementia Training Australia, and there's a whole suite of programs that we could put links to in the notes after this from Apu that go through the sorts of programs that we run, because we're running different programs for care workforce, but also for community workers and others across the country. So that's me.
Yeah, I'm Liz. Hi, Liz Fogel. And I'm also an architect working in Nick's firm. And my background over many years has been focusing on designing for people with dementia. You can maybe tell from my accent that I'm from the UK, from Scotland, where I worked for over 10 years on aged care buildings. And then I moved to Australia to work for Hammond Care in their Capital Works team. Also been involved with Stirling University and the Dementia Centre, delivering training and focusing really on how to make people's lives better who are living with dementia through design.
Now, Sahil, you need to duck around. We've got a third person in the room with us. So another architect from our firm, Sahil, has joined us. He's going to be behind the chat screen. So we are going to use the chat screen. So if you go there to answer people's chat, you know who's responding to whatever you send through. But we are going to use the chat screen as a way of both taking questions, but there are a few times that we're going to ask you to respond to something on the screen or to put your comments there. And where possible, we're going to, through Sahil, address some of those things as a way of making this something where we can connect a bit more with you. We're going to start now, before we go into the main content, with a short activity that we found useful in the past. So if we go to the next slide, Sahil, this is a scene from a sort of expensive hotel, and I'm asking you to just transform yourself to this place in East Jerusalem and to imagine you're sitting in this scene here in this hotel. Do you like the scene? Don't you like it? And why? So think about that a little bit, and even just type one thing into the chat that Sahil's monitoring. So looking at the scene, you're sitting, maybe you're the person sitting over here chatting to a friend over a cup of coffee, or one of these people sitting over here. And the question is this a scene that's attractive to you? Are you enjoying being there? And if so, why? Now let's go to the next scene. So this is a scene, I'm not exactly sure where this is. I'm thinking it's somewhere European. It's a scene in which there are people at maybe a festival, or maybe this is just in a piazza somewhere in Spain or Italy. And imagine again yourself in this scene. Do you like this scene? Don't you like it? And why? So you might be this bald bloke over here that looks more like me, or you might be somebody who's further over in the scene. Picture yourself in the scene and think about that. Okay, Sally, if we can go back to the previous slide again. So now in this activity, I want you to look at it again, but look at it through the eyes of the future you. Imagine that you're there at the age of 1995 and you're sitting in the same scene. And again, it's the same question. Is this an attractive scene to you? Do you enjoy being there? And what makes that work? Just pick one particular thing. So it might be something that relates to the greenery. It might be something that relates to the way the furniture's set up. Anything about that scene. And again, Sahil, if we go to the scene, thank you very much. So again, in the scene, same question. The future you, you're sitting in the scene. Do you like it? Don't you like it? And why? One particular thing. Okay, So, Liz, you've been watching these images as well.
I have.
Are there any
Yes.
comments that you've got while Sahel collates a few of the responses?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say I like both of the scenes. I like both of them. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Yeah. I like in the first scene, I like that it feels very peaceful. I like the fact that they're both outside. It looks like a very balmy, both kind of nice weather. You're going to enjoy chatting to friends. I like the water in this scene, and I like the kind of social aspect of both of them. If you go to the second scene, I think if I was an older person, I would be beginning to find this more difficult to be in.
Okay, so have anybody come back with responses like that?
Yes. Generally, people are saying the same thing. Like they find the first scene very relaxing. There's lots of greenery out there. Whereas the second scene, they find it overwhelming.
Yes.
And it's too crowded.
Yes.
And it looks noisy to some
Yes.
people and might be too busy for somebody.
Yeah.
Excellent. So the things that I see in this, touching upon what you've said and adding to that, I think that if I'm not really familiar with this space, I might get a bit confused in the older me. Like I know that when I was 19 and travelled around the world as a backpacker, I really loved scenes like this and the amount of life that was there. Already my hearing is a little bit compromised at the age that I'm at now, and the future me might have difficulty hearing the conversation. If I don't live in this place, I've got a really bigger difficulty knowing what's where. If I'm looking for a bathroom, where's the bathroom? And if I want to move around, it's a bit crowded, so it's hard for me to get out. Whereas we go to the previous scene, and this scene to me, nice when I was 19, nice today, and nice in the future. It's quiet. I could sit here all day and probably be comfortable.
And yet it's still social.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The key thing for us of this activity is we're sort of reinforcing the fact that the people sitting in on this webinar, you know a lot of stuff. You actually look at these and the responses that you have to these are likely to already cover most of those things that we would over time like point out on these scenes. You're looking at them about how crowded they are. You're looking at them about noise. You're looking at them through the eyes of, can I see what I want to see? And this is something where through your work, you need to not jettison that information. You need to take that with you so that when you walk into a scene, you're still looking at it through those questions of what does this scene, this setting feel like to me? Because what we're going to talk through now isn't about whether somebody's got a shiny, fancy bench in their kitchen or whether it's a stylish thing. It's about where design comes in a way that really does affect people's lives.
So we're going to be talking about falls and a bit of a personal story. Like for so many people, it was a fall that triggered the collapse of my grandparents' ability to live independently. So my gran fell in the middle of the night in her bathroom, and my grandfather couldn't lift her. So he lay on the floor in the bathroom all night until morning. And that meant that they were both so deteriorated that they both had to go to hospital, him for exhaustion and her related to the fall injury. And there was that sequence of events that related to them then having to move into aged care. And then after that, very, very soon, my grandfather died. And this story is such a common one. It's, as Apu was saying, the stats in terms of people with dementia ending up in hospital, or people from ending up in hospital from a fall, are absolutely shocking or absolutely terrible. Now, my gran had vascular dementia, and that put her at even higher risk of ending up in hospital and a much higher risk of falling. She was also at higher risk of not recovering to her previous capacity, her previous level of function. Very, very common for people to decline once they've been admitted to hospital, or to be at risk of a significant event like having a delirium or sepsis, or actually falling again in hospital. So to keep people out of hospital is something that's really dear to my heart personally, but is a significant thing that we all need to work together to do. So it's fantastic that we're able to speak to you about it today. If we look at just dementia specifically, thanks Sahel, you guys will know, I'm sure, lots of facts, lots of things about dementia itself. It's a fatal condition, it's progressive. We know that Alzheimer's disease accounts for the largest number of cases of dementia. We know that 2 in 5 people over 90 will have dementia, and that it is the leading cause of death for women, and second leading cause for men in Australia. And a good thing that we know is that 2 out of 3 people are actually going to be living in the community. People who have dementia will be in the community. They're not going to be in an aged care home. They're not going to be in hospital. They are actually in the home. And so that's why the home environment is so critical to get right. And we know people want to stay at home. So providing that really supportive environment is really critical. Nick, I want to invite you back. Did you have anything else you want to say in terms of, and maybe in the chat, are there other stats about dementia that you think people should know that I've not covered here? There's lots of good information out there. And Nick, was there anything you wanted to add?
All I'd add into this point here is that often people want to focus on the pathology of dementia or the stats. I think it's important to realise a few things. One of them is there's a geriatrician in Sydney called Susan Curl who talks about the fact that there are risk factors that we can affect. And so what I do at my age can affect at a point at which I'm more likely
even your age,
to have a dementia.
Not that different. Yeah.
So the things that she talks about, and she lists off these different things. Some seem obvious, some less obvious. So they talk about diet and us managing weight, people managing diabetes, people managing their sleep, that these are things which can affect the onset of a dementia. But as well as that, smoking, general health, socializing, physical activity, these are all things which will affect us, will affect our health and the likelihood of us getting a dementia, as well as also managing hearing loss. So if somebody has hearing loss, them actually making sure they're on top of maintaining hearing aids, these things will affect the age at which somebody gets a dementia. And I think that's the important thing, that people focus a lot about, dementia being a binary thing. You have dementia, you don't. But there is firstly a progression of people progressing through a dementia, and there is at what point and at what speed that comes on. And we can do certain things which affect that risk.
Yeah, we can all do things.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that maintaining those social connections is so important. And again, if people are at home, that's one thing we'll look at in a minute, is about how we can maintain social connections to promote better outcomes in terms of falling. Was there anything from the chat, Sahil, or any questions so far?
Nothing so far.
Nothing on that. Okay, that's fine. That's okay.
So look, again, to just say, Sahil is on the chat, and we're not going to have we're not setting this up for a long Q&A at the end. So please do send questions through, and he'll just tell us if something comes through that we can then respond to. We've talked a little bit about the statistics and that pathology of dementia. We can go into more detail, but there are many other resources, and DTA does different programs like Dementia Essentials that introduces people to, in a very quick and simple way, what different dementias are and how they affect people. But for us as architects in particular, it's really about how do we relate to the person rather than the statistics? How do we relate to somebody who actually has a dementia and their life is affected and they're living with it? Or to Mark Cribbs at Group Homes Australia in Sydney talks about living beyond a diagnosis of dementia. And are there things that you'd like to run through here?
There are.
Excellent. Amazing. I'll step off to the side, and if we go on to the next slide there.
Okay, so I don't know about you, I am quite I think scatty might be the word I would use. I quite often lose my phone or my keys, maybe sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and it's something my husband cannot understand, because he never loses his phone, and he always knows where his keys are, and it's just, I find it kind of miraculous. But the first thing that I do when I've lost my phone is I think, I don't know if you're the same, where was the last time I had it? And I'm immediately using my memory. I'm trying to think, where was it? What was I doing when I last used my phone? So for somebody with dementia, that obviously, as you know, short-term memory loss is often the most obvious first symptom of having a dementia. It's not always the first symptom, but it can be. And so memory is something we use so much. The second thing that I would normally do if I've lost my phone is if I can't remember, which I always can't, is to try and work out where I might have had it last. So did I have it beside the stove top when I was cooking dinner? Did I leave it in my daughter's room when I was helping her pack her bag? Or maybe it's beside my bed. I'm trying to work it out, use my reasoning to work out where it is. So that's something that also could be affected by dementia. The third thing might be my ability to learn would be affected. So say I've decided that I'm actually always going to put my phone beside, like on the hall table when I come in from work. It's always going to be there. That's going to be the place to keep it. If I had dementia, that would be a harder thing for me to learn, that's the new place. The fourth thing is that even once I've found my phone and I'm looking at it potentially with a dementia, it might affect my ability to actually see it. So my visual perception might be affected. I might not actually be able to recognize the object. So that's one thing that could be affected, or it could be to do with my sense of contrast could be reduced, or my ability to actually see the object in space might be affected. So even when I've found it, the dementia might mean that I still would have failed in that sense. And so you can imagine that if that's the situation, my stress levels are going to be heightened. I'm going to be really feeling anxious and worried and heightened in stress. And we know that people's stress thresholds are reduced if we have dementia. The next thing that could be affected would be my motor control. And that can be affected at different at different stages of dementia. Sometimes it's much later in the journey. Other times it can be something that comes quite early in the diagnosis, is a reduced ability to control motor. And that is something that takes a huge amount of energy. In fact, all of these things are taking brain function, are taking a huge amount of energy to control. And I guess the last thing that's really important to emphasize is that throughout this process of having lost my phone and maybe not finding it again, or is that sense of failure or the sense of lack of esteem, which I'm left with, which I'm feeling that, oh gosh, I should have been able to do better. Why am I not able to function? And so the person's sense of worth and sense of esteem can be really deteriorated by this point. So you can see that it can be a really difficult thing for many people to manage, and I've only just touched on a few areas here. But the good thing is that design can really make a massive difference in all of these areas of impairment. Now, it's important to know the difference between impairment and a disability. What is an impairment and what is a disability? So an impairment is something that your doctor would tell you, or your optician, for example. I'll take myself as another example, as a case in point. I've got very poor eyesight, so I think I'm -6.5. I'm very short-sighted, but that's just an impairment. It's not a disability because it can be completely corrected by just contact lenses. Amazing. So it actually makes no impact in my quality of life at all. But if that couldn't be corrected, then and that's a type of vision impairment that's incorrectable, then that could become a disability if the environment isn't supporting it. So the environment in the case of the contact lenses supports the vision, or if it's a social aspect. So if someone people in the space that you're occupying are unsupportive of you, that could be a social way that you could be disabled. So I want to move now on just to look at some risk factors for a person with dementia falling, because these are significant. So this list here is taken from a recent paper last year by Morag Taylor and Jacqueline Close, who wrote a really helpful paper on factors to support, to preventing falls in older people with dementia. So a paper looking all at that, but basically focused on GPs. And this was the list of risk factors that they came up with. So some of them are really obvious. So for example, impaired mobility and balance and dizziness. That makes a lot of sense. But then the second one is low levels of physical activity. And that's something that might be less obvious, particularly when you think that we commonly see in aged care homes staff encouraging people to stay seated, to remain seated and not move about, because they are worried about falling, when actually counter to that, if people are moving about, they're more likely to be retain the strength and be able to move confidently and are less likely to fall. So we really want to encourage people to keep moving. Impaired executive function, impaired visual spatial ability and vision. So I've touched on that already, particularly in Alzheimer's, a reduced ability to see in terms of brain function can really impact on how you can navigate your space. And then impaired processing speed as well. So the person might have a slower reaction time to things changing or going wrong. Depression and anxiety, also two significant risk factors for falling. And this is really interesting to think about in a bit of depth, about why being depressed would cause you to fall. So I'd be interested for people to put in the chat anything, how they see the link between depression or anxiety with falling, but that's something we will be looking at in a moment. Medication impacts, so particularly the use of polypharmacy. So if someone's on more than 4 medications, that increases your risk. If someone is on a psychotropic drug, that increases your risk of falling. And so it's something to look out for if your clients or your family members are on psychotropic drugs. That's something to maybe consider having reviewed, whether it's really appropriate for a person if they have dementia. Often prescribed. Inadequate nutrition and low vitamin D. So we all know that you get vitamin D through going outside, which is fantastic to get access outside, and so we'll be looking at that in a moment. And also footwear, poor footwear and foot care, again tying in potentially with the idea of if someone is feeling more low in mood, often that leads to someone not caring for themselves in the way they might normally have, and that can lead to things like poor foot care. All right, so thanks so much, Dale. So there's a big list. You can see just how much that the brain has to process and how risks can build up. It's a multifaceted type of risk matrix. But the good news is then that we have a lot of things we can do. There's a multifaceted approach we can take to supporting the person and reducing those risks. And Nick and I have been working on with the Department of Health and Aged Care on some principles and guidelines and for aged care, but would you like to expand on them a little bit more?
I will, just quite briefly. If you go to the next slide, we've got a diagram there. So what this, as Liz said, the department engaged us to look at design principles and guidelines for residential aged care. As principles, they're really a starting point for a conversation. And we brought it down to, the team brought it down to 4 principles, which are all about, at the core, they're all about the dignity, the independence, the action of an individual. So how do we maintain somebody's independence? How do we provide a safe environment for somebody? And how do we provide them with comfort when that's at a point in their life when that's the aim? So if you look at the image that we've got over here, we're saying at the centre of it is a person who we're looking to enable to live the fullest life they can. Within the context of a care environment, we looked at cultivating home, we looked at connecting with community, and we looked at accessing the outdoors. So if we move on to the next slide, when we bring that into what that means for a family home, so Sally, if we move to the next slide. So same core issues. At the centre is the person living in their home, and we're looking at those same issues of how can we reduce the cognitive load because that enables somebody to live the fullest life. And we're about to go through a little bit of a conversation about what that actually means. We're then going to look at maintaining social connections, what we can do there, saying that this is a key important thing, both to our lives, but also to maintaining health, so both to just our sense of well-being as well as ongoing physical health. And the third key issue there is us looking at the environment outdoors, looking at gardens and balconies and what stops people going out to them or what makes it easier for them to do that. There's a question over there, Sahil.
There's a question. Somebody's asking, what were the national design principles?
So the National Design Principles are something which came up out of the Royal Commission. There were very many recommendations in the Royal Commission into residential aged care and those environments. And one of the recommendations were that the government establish a set of design principles and guidelines. These have been something that's been underway. The diagrams that we showed you were first presented in a public way by the key stakeholder within government, presenting them at a health expo, I think it was a health conference. So through later this year, these will be likely to be presented in a draft form. And so we're showing you the principles that were first presented by Rob Day at that conference, and they've been written up in Australian Ageing Agenda as that first presentation to the public. Again, those might be built around the environments that need to do the most to support somebody, but we're saying everything in those translates into other environments. It translates into hospital environments, it definitely translates into family home. So that's a lead into looking at the first one of those, which is cognitive load.
Yeah, looking at cognitive load. So key things with reducing cognitive load for people is basically less of some things and more of other things. So less clutter and less noise, and then highlighting what people need to see through the use of contrast, but also the use of really good lighting. So now the next slide shows, and I'll try and duck out the way. I don't know if anybody there recognizes this home, but if you do, put it in the chat, and the first person to get the right answer will get some sort of prize. I don't know what that prize will be, but yeah, this is a famous Australian home. Has someone guessed?
Yes.
Someone has guessed. Okay, I'm not going to tell you right now. I'm gonna let you just simmer until because it may just come to you. I'm going to give you one clue. It's in Melbourne. Yeah. Okay. So looking at this home, this could be your average typical Australian home. It looks a bit like a tidy house. It is actually a real estate photograph, so it's tidier than my house, let's say. But what are the things in this room that you really would want to highlight? And what things would you want to make more discreet? So we're talking about particularly reducing clutter in this image. Now it looks tidy, but are the things that you'd like to, you think you should remove, which would be helpful to a person navigating? Now, bearing in mind the things that we've said about vision impairment, the difficulties people would have with perception. Now I'm just opening that to the floor. So has anyone put anything in the chat on that?
Yes.
Yes. What have people said?
People are saying there is not enough contrast. And somebody said move the ottoman.
Move the ottoman. Okay.
And then there are some question marks regarding the floor, that it might not be appropriate.
Yeah.
And then there's comment regarding change the stools to the stable.
Yep.
The ottoman might be a trip hazard for somebody.
Yes. Now, fantastic answer. Thanks, everybody. So why, I wonder, the ottoman might be a problem. Now that is because it's really is a very similar color to the floor. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you in black and white, and I've got two orange arrows which are pointing at other things. but the ottoman and the table are both very similar in tonal value to the floor. And this means that if you've got a vision impairment, or your contrast sensitivity is poor, or you're less able to see in 3D, as is very common with dementia, those things are more likely to be trip hazards. And the other thing that is a problem is the suitability of the floor, as people were saying, is that really stark contrast between the carpet and the tiles. So the tiles are really light in color and the carpet is really quite dark. And so that presents as a step to someone, could present to someone as a step. So that is actually, even though it's completely level, and we know that most falls actually occur, when they occur in the home, are actually over a completely flat surface, that people fall where there is not necessarily a step. That's what the stats amazingly say, but it could be in situations like this, where you've got change in surface, change in color, presenting like a step. So what were the other things? Lack of contrast. Or, sorry, Sahil, you're saying something?
Yeah, people are saying lack of contrast with the floor.
Yeah.
But somebody is also mentioning that the timber finish on the cabinetry is too busy or too
Yes.
strong visually.
Absolutely correct. And it's all very dark actually in the kitchen as well. So it's very hard to see, for example, where the door handles are on those cupboards, and everything is kind of blending into kind of one surface. I would also say, absolutely right, the person that said about the stools, they look very dodgy and not very stable, and no arms on them either. So from a basic getting on and off, they would be problematic for many people. If so, you can move to the next slide. There, I've tweaked it through the power of, I'd like to say Photoshop, but actually I didn't, I just did it in PowerPoint. The color of the tiles, just to be a bit darker, and you can see how that edge with the carpet just disappears a bit more. So blended together. And so then the focus for the person is not that strong edge here, but it's actually the kitchen itself. And I've also lightened those cupboards, just the bottom half I lightened to give a better contrast then with what is now a darker floor, if that makes sense. And the third thing I've done is highlight the table with used to this function of standing in front of the screen. So there's a very light colored table against the floor. You can see that's so much easier for people to see. We know that from a vision impairment point of view, contrast and lighting is critical. And so the best thing to do is to change, like take a photograph of a room, make it black and white, and then you'll be able to see much more easily what are the things that are hazards and should be disguised. All right, next slide, please.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about noise. And in that first one, clutter being so significant, is about our visual environment. When we talk about noise, we're talking about our hearing, obviously. And one of the things about dementia to be aware of is there's natural healthy aging, which is my eyesight becoming less acute or my hearing becoming less acute. And then there's the effect of a dementia, which might make it harder for the brain to then process the signals which are being given to it by eyes and ears. So noise is a key thing. Sound is actually how we socialise. Our social environment is much more auditory than visual. And so everyday sounds can become noise. Again, I'm going to put it out to the group. Just throw in something which you think might be noise in a home environment. I'll keep going, but please throw in a whole lot of those questions. Things which we may be able to filter out as we're at an age where our ears are working in a healthier way, or we don't have a dementia, that might become difficult, could be background noise, things like a lawnmower, things like any other ambient noise, or somebody next door listening to music. The key thing I'm looking at here is what can we do to affect change? And what we can do is we can actually look at where we can remove noise. We can look at ways of blocking out noise or dampening it. If we're in a room, we're currently in a room here where we're thinking through, because of this webinar, acoustic finishes on the walls, we're thinking through carpet, cushions, whatever, is going to dampen the noise to give less feedback. The same thing happens in somebody's house. Sahil?
There is a comment. Somebody said change is easy to say, but not so easy to introduce to older persons.
Yeah, that's a really
especially
good
the
point.
ones with dementia. Familiarity has its good points as well.
Absolutely. So one of the things which I've, again, to quote Tamar Krebs from Group Homes Australia, I've heard her talk about situations where somebody's in hospital and people go, oh, we've got to get rid of all this clutter and we need to clear it up. The person comes home and doesn't recognise their house. So everything which we're saying it's very easy to draw something as an architect or make a statement. The challenge, really, the art of it, is doing something that empowers somebody rather than taking away that agency from them. So if the focus is somebody maintaining independence, they've got to be in that conversation of talking to them about, well, this environment is actually really cluttered. What can we do about it? This is noisy. What things might we do to your house that would actually be a good thing?
Yeah, I just added on to that. If we go to the next slide as well, thanks, Phil. That it's the benefit that you have of working with someone in their own home is that you can really focus your attention on what really matters to them. That we, when we're designing a care home setting, we're trying to think about a cohort of people and a mixture of different needs, and trying to be all things to all men, which you end up always not necessarily being able to give the best result for each individual. But if you're thinking about someone's house, you have that benefit of thinking, what do they particularly need at this point in time? And so yeah, just emphasize that, like, you don't need to change everything. You can just think about what is the most important thing for them right now. Now, this is the same house, Mystery House, and is the stairwell or the hall of the house. And for this slide, I'd like to talk about highlighting what might you want to highlight. What's the most important thing in this room, do you reckon? I'm not going to ask for people to put things in the chat, because I know that you're going to say the stairs. The stairs is what's most important. Now, the stairs is a difficult area to talk about, because you want them to be as safe as possible, but you don't want to change too much, because people will have got used to using their stairs over time, and their bodies will be used to using their stairs. So you don't want to suddenly even necessarily change the surface of the flooring, or you might not want to completely change the banister or something like that. But there are things you could do to make them a bit safer. So in this instance, I'd like to highlight there the stringer. And so you can see, just by doing that, just using contrast again, by painting that the skirting board against the edge of the stairs, you can really highlight the three-dimensionality of the stairs, and that will help someone be more confident knowing what stair is where. Now, are there other things you would want to change in this image? And you pop them in the chat. And Sahil, yes.
Somebody's saying the codes / hats on the hook.
Yes.
Hooks is a problem. It might think they are a different person.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a really good point. So that's just an added distraction. Like, as I'm going up the stairs, just that kind of thing, which actually could look like a person, could be quite confusing. It's a strange place to have it. So yeah, particularly when you want someone to be able to focus on something that's quite difficult, like going up and down stairs, and which needs a lot of concentration, keep that area clear, as clear as possible. So it's always a balance between familiarity, because you want people to know and feel like they're at home, but also making things really simple and clear. And so that could be about getting rid of things like bills and papers, but making sure that the person's belongings that are important are really very visible. Any other items on the chat there?
There is a question.
Yes.
Somebody's asking, would you highlight the balustrade as well?
Yes, you'd highlight the balustrade. I think that's a really good idea. You could paint the top handrail, and so you forget about the newel post things there. You could just paint that top handrail in a white, and that would make that stand out more. Another thing you could do would be to add a second banister on the other side of the wall at the same height, to support someone going up and down the stairs, depending on which side they prefer. Nick, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, but I'm going to move on to, I want to move on to lighting, because in the last couple of minutes that we've got, I'm going to flick through a few slides. We focused mainly on that first principle, enabling the person, because it's so critical to somebody functioning at home. What we touched upon before, which was eyesight, our eyes are less able to function in a way. They need more light as we get older. The diagram here, let's just go over there, was showing at the age of 10, if that's how much light our eyes need, you can see over time we're needing more light, a significant amount more light. This is going to like twice the amount of light in order for us to actually process information as we get older. And that line's only at the age of, I think, 60. Okay. So the key thing here is light's a really big issue, and we need more light. We particularly need more light just because we're older, but also if somebody has a dementia. And that means that it's really as simple as us actually increasing the ambient light, so the light which there is in a room, as well as focusing on task lighting as well. I'm going to ask you to flick through to, do you want to say anything in summary on that first design principle? Because I'm going to wrap up just looking at the other two. Okay, if you flick through to the one which, keep going through there, to the one that then looks, these are just some slides going through, and one more that goes through to socialisation. Okay, this is just basically saying, in terms of, I've just gone a bit blurry there, but in terms of people's lives, we started off talking about everything we do here is looking at how do we maintain somebody's independence, how do we keep their connections up with friends, with the community. This is really significant. In terms of the family home, this is one that we don't go into in as much detail. It's just how can we maintain those connections. Were there any particular ideas that you wanted to highlight at this point?
I was thinking about what makes the home easy for people to visit in terms of neighbours and friends. How can we encourage visiting in people's homes to support reduced anxiety? And
absolutely, because I think that is so important.
Yeah.
The final design principle, which again is very critical, but brings in, if we go to the next slide, Sahel, brings in a lot of the issues we were talking about in terms of an inside environment. Outdoors is so important. It's important for us to maintain, just for our mental health, a connection to the outdoors, for us to be able to have access to daylight in terms of vitamin D. Getting outdoors isn't just a nice to have, it's actually critical. And most of what stops people getting outdoors is a pathway to get there. So everything we looked at in terms of enabling a person within their home, if we look at the pathway that leads out to a garden, a terrace or a balcony, that's also fundamentally important. If we go on to the next slide, just here, there are some activity cards. So we'll give you links to other resources that we have. At DTA, there's a series of cards for your team. It runs through some of the principles of questions for people to think through that cover these issues we've been talking about. They're free resource. Again, Upper can give you links to the DTA Environments team, and we can send you out these or guide you to websites that have that. There's a lot of resources that are out there to support this sort of work, and there are both the resources DTA does, the Dementia Centre, Hammond Cares Dementia Centre has a really solid book called My Home, My Life. In Western Australia, there is a Dementia Enabling's website, and all these are things that we'll put links onto with the website. With the show notes from this. Any final comments, Liz, before we wrap up for today?
No, I just wanted to reveal, if you can keep going. So this is the outside of the house, final clue. And the last slide is Kath and Kim. Kath and Kim's, now Nick here has never seen Kath and Kim.
I've never seen, I know, it's terrible.
Shocking. But it was their home, and they unfortunately it's been demolished, which is very sad. But if it wasn't, I'm sure they'd be grateful for you to visit. One other resource I wanted to just say was we have a lovely practice note from the RNIB on falls dementia and sight loss, which we will include a link to, and there's also the 10 tips for dementia design at home from Stirling University.
Excellent. So, there's one last question, Sahel.
There's one last comment. Eliza guessed the right.
Excellent. So there's a door prize there for Eliza. Excellent. So Apu, it's back to you.
Thank you, Nick and Liz. That was amazing presentation. I loved the use of Kath and Kim as well, but I'm on Nick's side. I haven't watched it yet, so I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, disgrace, I know. But thank you guys. If there's any other questions, just pop them in the chat box, and if there's anything we can get through that quickly.
I just wanted to interrupt, sorry, and say that we actually will be in Perth running a one-day design masterclass that will go through. It's geared towards architects or care professionals, but we'll definitely be including content which is relevant to the people on this call. So there is a date there. Please do come along if you're interested.
It's going to be fun.
It will be fun. Sorry,
Yeah,
back
and
to-
no worries. Thank you for letting me know about that. All the information will be shared in a follow-up email as well with all the links to things. So you can register. All the webinar recording as well will be distributed to people as well. I'm just going to quickly wrap up and then let you guys go. But yeah, just highlighting that there's heaps of resources on the Dementia Training Australia website. You can make an account and access these. One that is quite interesting to people that want to learn more about falls prevention and dementia is the exercise and falls in people living with dementia and mild cognitive impairment. So yeah, like follow the link as well, and we'll send that out in a follow-up email. And lastly, we have the Community Falls Network. So there's other areas that you can get involved in falls prevention. The Community Falls Network is a group of health professionals that meet 4 times a year. If you're interested in being involved in that, just send me a quick email. And Connected, which is an online networking platform for people that work in the injury prevention space. Also, lastly, an evaluation survey is going to pop up as you leave today's webinar. We'd love to hear more about what you thought about today's webinar as well. So let us know your thoughts and any suggestions for future trainings as well. But yeah, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Liz, and thank you, Sahil, as well, for your time and effort in today's presentation.
Thank you.